Hi, in this video I'm going to look at fitting a skid plate onto a Royal X canoe. That would be the same as fitting one onto a T4X canoe as well, but I'll go into more detail within the video. This is one of my older boats. It's a Winona Rogue, a really good tandem whitewater boat, and you can see there's quite a bit of wear on the stem of the boat, on this area of the boat. And in particular, you can see we've gone through the first layer of material, of vinyl material, down to the harder subsurface, this white showing through here. So probably could have done with putting a skid plate on a bit earlier, but it's now time to do so. In addition to that, some clients managed to, no fault of their own, punch a hole through the other end of the boat, which is the bow. And so that's the end we're going to put the first skid plate onto. I've already done a repair, filling the hole with putty, and now I'm going to put the skid plate over the top of it, so it protect not only the hole that's been repaired, but the rest of this area of the boat. So this is a skid plate kit from Endless River. Most major canoe manufacturers will come out with their own, but Dave at Endless River, easy to get hold of the kit. And it all comes in a container like this. We have 2 Kevlar patches. I've only got one down here because we're going to do one end. We've got the resin, we've got a hardener, we've got mixing stick, some sandpaper, brush to work with, because we're only going to do one. It's going to actually ruin this brush, so we'll need another brush on the other end, but I only want to do one today. And very, very importantly, before I get to the very important, we have cling film. That's going to give us a smooth finish, hold everything in place while we're doing it. Comprehensive instructions, and very importantly, gloves. The problem with all this stuff is it's really aggressive on the skin. So small amounts of it I can get away with. Other people, you're going to get a reaction immediately. Also, very, very importantly, if you get a splash on the eyes, loads of water, off to the hospital. So you really want to be careful. I wear glasses. Be careful, or put goggles on. Tend to be careful more than anything. But you do need to protect the skin from this stuff. Couple things not included within the pot of goodies. They recommend a large piece of cardboard to work on, and also to do a final clean on the surface, and I'm really careful using this stuff. Acetone, and that is to make sure there's no grease. But that is the same as nail polish remover. When I use it on the boat, I'm going to just use it so gently, because plastics can be affected by this. Just a very light touch on the cloth, very quickly wipe over, let it dry off. I don't want copious amounts of this stuff. All these things can damage plastic, so be very careful. The really nice thing with this is that Lena's going to actually put it on and do the work. And there's a really good reason, or 2 good reasons for this. If I do it, she always spots the mistakes I make, and they're fairly normal for me. And secondly, she's very good at doing this job. She's the practical one of the 2 of us in the household. So I'm going to let her put it on. I'll film her doing it. So very importantly, this is a Royal X boat. That's been superseded by T4X from Esquith. And both of those materials react in the same way. So we'll take some sandpaper to this, make sure there's a surface there to work to. We'll clean it with acetone very carefully, and we can apply the epoxies straight onto the T4X or the Royal X. They will bind into those surface plastics. That is not a problem at all. But if you're putting a bang plate onto a polyethylene boat, so the sort of heavier weight plastics, which are old time use in their heavier boats, then you need to change the chemical composition of the surface. Exactly the same as in my outfitting video, and I'll put a link below in the description in the information. You need to run a blue flame across the surface. You're not heating the surface, but you gently run a blue flame across the surface, only for a few seconds. You're not warming the plastic, you're not heating it at all. And what that does is makes a slight chemical change in the surface of the plastic, and that allows our epoxies to bind into it. Now, go back to this boat, being Royal X, we do not run a flame across this. Not a good idea.
Myers Wendy watermelon pen. I'm just roughly drawing around it because we're going to sandpaper at least 2 centimetres bigger than the patch because it will stretch. And then I don't want to touch it after it's clean. It moulds as you put it on. If you give it a little tug, it moulds right into place.
A lot of people at this stage will use cling film or a bin bag split up and then gaffer taped onto the canoe, so that any epoxy that runs or is dribbled doesn't get onto the rest of the canoe. The epoxy comes in 2 parts, a resin and a hardener. And Lena is marking up the containers because we're only using half of this.
Big gloves. I also cleaned the bucket. I've got to mix this for about a minute. I'll open the door in a minute because it'd be good if you have a well ventilated area because it is quite stinky. Quite a big one in the middle. And thinner around the edge.
You're using the brush here to actually push the epoxy into the mat. And in fact, at a certain stage, once you've really worked hard on one side, and you can see here now it's beginning to push in, you can turn the mat over and then work again from the other side. What we want to do is get the mat saturated with epoxy. And now we can apply a layer of epoxy directly to the canoe.
You have got time, you don't need to panic, to be honest. This is actually... If you pull it, it'll make it'll go around the profile. Pull it top.
Rather than using your hands for this job, some people will use a windscreen scraper, car windscreen scraper, and using the rubber edge, press it out that way.
So if you squeeze from the middle to the edges, what you ensure you do is get the air bubbles out. And that's the repair under there, so I want to saturate that a little bit more in a sec.
Note that at this stage the mat is still showing two distinct colours, a very lighter one and one where it's darker and hence saturated. And through this next stage, Lena's going to be working hard to really push the epoxy into that to get an even colour throughout. And you can now see that evenness of colour throughout the mat. And now a little bit of cleaning up, getting any excess epoxy off the boat, put it back onto the mat. Putting the cling film onto the boat and across the skid plate is going to do a number of things.
Pull it tight.
Firstly, it's going to hold that plate really tightly in place, which will hopefully give us a better bond in the end. It's going to give us a smooth finish, and also when we come to the final part, just smoothing it out, it's going to help us have a more a smoother edge onto the boat rather than an abrupt drop to the boat. Something that can catch on rocks, we'll get a smoother junction. Make do with this, please.
Looks pretty good, Ray. Have a look. That's the hole. And then we've got to turn it around so all this fluid that you can see that's squishing out will go back into the matting as opposed to seeping down the canoe. So we're just going to flip it around.
And if you're wondering why we're doing it in the living room, it's a great house for this. My store shed is quite small in reality, and it's also a cold time of year. By bringing it in, we've got a warm environment for the resin, for the epoxy to go off in. Too cold and it's not going to work.
That's good. Sit tight, baby.
So here we have the skid plate fitted, nice smooth finish, really pressed down here so there's not much to catch, and that should keep the boat going for many years to come. A big thanks to Dave at Endless River for supplying the kit, and for Lena for doing all the work. If you've enjoyed this video, please click on the like button. If you'd like to subscribe, please click on the icon in the bottom right corner.